Welcome to the fine print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and today, this is awesome. We got my old friend Mike Ferrant here. Mike, thank you for joining me, sir.
Of course, old neighbor.
Yeah, actually, a couple of my buddies bought up your old house, Alyssa and Jeffro.
Yeah.
Right on. So before we get going, obviously, I know a bit about your life story. But for everyone watching, would you mind sharing your 5-minute life story with us, or take 10 or 15? I don't care.
I ramble, so I'll try not to ramble about myself.
No, ramble away, sir.
So I grew up in New Hampshire, not Vermont, and went to school in southern New Hampshire and moved to Vermont to go to college up at Wyndham State. And I wanted to study psychology because I really liked how people think and why they do what they do. Got my degree, got a job, and didn't really like the field. And so looking for other things, I did other work and still work today. But I also am a veteran. So I served in the Army Reserves for 21 years, retired Army
Forever.
Reserve. Well, my last contract was forever. Indefinite years was the only way I could re-enlist when I was 13 years in, and I was an E6, and that was just the policy for it. So it says indefinite years. I'm in the retired reserve. If things go terribly, then who knows? But I don't go to drills anymore. I don't have any.
Didn't you say you joined the military super young?
Yeah, I joined at 17 years old. So I was 17. I was a junior in high school, and I did this program they called split option. So I went to basic training between my junior and senior year of high school, and then I went to advanced training the next phase after my senior year. And that was harder because everyone else went through them together. And so when they got to their advanced training where you earn your job in the Army, they were already in shape. And just 2 days ago, they were in boot camp. And I had a whole senior year of high school to get out of shape and out of the mindset. And we were all together, and they hated me. They were like, "Oh, you just had a year off." And I was like, "You guys were just doing this yesterday." And I got to relearn it now. But yeah, no, I was young. So I got 20 years in at 37 years old. So not a bad deal.
How old are you now, Mike?
44.
44. Still looking young and handsome.
Oh, you too. I see the purple hair. That's good. It matches your background. Nice job.
Covers up the gray.
The guy, no, I get these like gray beard hairs now, and they're stiff. They don't grow like normal hair. They kind of stick out.
Now, Mike, yeah. I'd really like to dive into the military stuff, but I also thought it was worth noting that, if I'm not mistaken, you also seem to do like a lot of sort of charitable work around the community here. Is that anything you care to talk about a little bit?
Not today, but maybe some other time.
Okay, cool. Well, I liked the poker night. That was fun.
I know, right? Yeah. And so, my military service was a big part of my career. And kind of want to tell you one of those stories today. But, I'm a dad, getting married next month.
Hey.
Next year, not next month. Next year. Getting ahead of myself.
Save the date.
Yeah, Red Sox fan, and I watch football. I mow my lawn. I'm an old man now. I just kind of fit into a groove.
I miss our poker games, by the way.
Me too. I flip through the TV, and all of a sudden, it'll be on ESPN, like World Poker Tour, and I'm like, oh, I miss that. Those are fun times.
Yeah.
But you get older,
Yeah, we got lives now and stuff to do.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, so let's dive into the military stuff, man. Like, I'd love to just start from the beginning and work your way through. And if you got some interesting stories along the way, we'll dig into those as well. Yeah.
So I think there's important things to the point of this story that I'll highlight along the way that kind of set the stage for it. So I was in the Army Reserves for the full 21 years. And sometimes people think of the reserves as a part-time gig or not really Army or fake Army or something like that, because you're not doing it all the time. You do 1 weekend a month and 2 to 3 weeks in the summer. And that was my career from 1995 until 2001, before 9/11. It was very much, just show up for drill weekends, and everyone, parties on Saturday night. I was an engineer, so we did bulldozers and heavy construction equipment, and we built ball fields for local towns as our training.
Oh, cool.
On our drill weekends. And then our 2 weeks in the summer, they called it summer camp back then. I mean, you'd go and do like a bunch of ball fields, or you'd do combat training in the side. You'd have your uniform on, but you were a construction engineer, so you needed hours on a bulldozer to learn it. But everyone would drink and just party and have fun. And, 9/11 really shifted the reserves from a weekend warrior mindset into more of a, hey, you might go somewhere and have to be real Army and do the real thing. And the whole mindset shifted. We stopped doing 2-day weekends and moved to Friday, Saturday, Sundays, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays. Every drill weekend had combat components to it now. It wasn't just, the fat old guy sitting around drinking beer. It was.
So you started ramping it up the training.
You could really feel it. And we deployed in 2003 to Iraq and Kuwait. And we did a lot of building in Kuwait of the invasion bases. We went up into Iraq for a little bit, did some stuff up there construction wise, but it was all under a tactical environment. Came home. And the reserves really, I went 3 times. So I went to Kuwait and Iraq in 03 to 04, to Afghanistan in 2011, and then back to Iraq in 2015. And reservists aren't trained, and it's not the system, the style is not conducive to coming together and going into combat zones for 9 to 10 to 12 months at a time. It takes a lot of training beforehand. You go, to a training area together and spend weeks there getting ready to go. Because
I feel like you mentioned that something about a training where they set up like a fake village or something.
Yeah. And you do simulations and things like that. And it's really because you only see each other two days a month, and maybe you text or you keep in touch throughout the month, but really you're only together 2 to 3 days every month. And so to come together as a cohesive team and go overseas, you really need that training and that camaraderie together.
Sure.
So, but those aren't really the thing I want to talk about today. In the olden days, the Army has drug testing policies, right? And they were always, 100% of the unit has to get tested every year. And what that used to look like is in December, at the 2-day drill in December, we do mandatory briefings, PowerPoint briefings all day Saturday, and then a family-friendly Christmas party on Sunday. Well, what also happened while you're sitting in an auditorium watching 30 PowerPoint trainings back to back to back is they'd pluck us out one at a time to do the drug test. And everyone knew that's when you went and peed in the cup every year. And so if people did do drugs or smoke weed or whatever, it was very well known you just didn't do it in December or November, right? Because it stays in your fat and piss for 30 days and all of that. And so I think and I believe that there were plenty of people smoking cannabis, smoking weed, probably doing even other drugs, January through November, and then just taking a break before Christmas. After 9/11, that mindset kind of shifted and it became a lot more random. So people that did want to still be in the reserves and smoke cannabis or whatever, they just had to be more mindful of when drill was coming up and stuff like that. It was still somewhat predictable. Well, my deployment to Afghanistan was probably the most intense one of my 3 in 2011. And it took me by surprise how much it affected me after. And I was drinking a lot, but I also started to dabble in cannabis. And I had always been kind of a casual smoker, but not anything like I wasn't a pro. I didn't have gas masks. I don't even think I had a bong for a long time.
So the first, sorry to interrupt. So the first tour in Iraq was sort of not as stressful.
Yeah, it wasn't as tactical, and it wasn't as what they call kinetic. It was
what duties were you performing in Iraq?
I mean, we were mostly building roads, leveling the sand, believe it or not, doing temporary base build and base destruction. So they had gone north and done the invasion, there were all of these temporary bases in Kuwait that were just sand pushed up into walls with a gate. And we had bulldozers. So we went in and knocked them back down into flat sand, packed them up because they weren't going to be used anymore. So it was a lot of work like that. The entry gate, the border of Kuwait to Iraq was like a 2-lane dirt road. And we turned it into like a 4 or 5-lane paved passage. And that stuff like that takes a long time, putting hot asphalt down on sand
in the desert.
In the desert, yeah, it's hot. But it was mostly construction work and things like that.
Cool.
2011, we were in Afghanistan. We were much more active and used actively in kinetic areas. And so if a infantry force or a special forces platoon needed a small temporary little base made, my unit would go out to do that work. And it's not, we're not the kind that kick in doors. We weren't clearing the village of all the bad guys. We were building the base that those guys would launch their operations from. And so you get this like front row seat to everything. You're in danger because you're the engineers, and people, the Taliban picked up pretty quickly that where we went or where we traveled to, there was usually bad things that were going to happen where we were.
Yeah, and I assume if you're if you're trying to build a base there, you're building it because it's close to where they might be, where they could stage an operation. So I would assume that would put you in some dangerous territory.
Yeah, and so we would end up in those kinds of territories. Often building the base that was going to be the safe place for people to be, and there'd only be 2 or 3 walls while you're building it. So you have to provide security and do your job. And you've got all your gear on, your tactical gear, your vest, your helmet. You've got a full combat load, 210 rounds, which are heavy at 210 of them, strapped to your body all the time. And it's just a little bit more difficult to be nimble and a construction engineer. And it, you kind of go day to day to day. You're so busy. There's not nightlife when you're deployed. You're not, it's not like you clock out at 5 p.m. and go home and have dinner with your family and chill out. You're just there all the time, and you're sleeping right there. So you might as well just get work done as much as you can.
What was your schedule like, if you don't mind me asking? Like, what was your daily routine? Like, when are you up, when you going to bed, and like how much shit do you have to do in between?
Probably up like 5 or 6. You go and eat, you do physical workout if you can. You go and eat breakfast. And then you just get to work because there's nothing else to do. Like, there's no commute, or maybe you do have to commute to where your job site is from your base, which is a whole nother movement. Like, you don't just get in a car and go to work. You tactically move through the battlefield, and that takes planning. So usually we'd stay where we were. But you wake up and there's nothing else to do. So you just eat breakfast and start work. And then you break for lunch, and then you break for dinner. But you just keep working, because the sooner you get that one done, the sooner you can move to the next one. One of the hardest things I found over there was having a day off or time off, and your body needs it. So you give it to your soldiers, and I was a leader over there, and
Right, you're an officer, right, or a staff sergeant or something?
No, I was a non-commissioned officer. Yeah, so a sergeant, staff sergeant, and finished up as a Sargeant First Class. But when you have a day off, you don't have anything to do. You might catch up on your laundry. You might write letters home. You might read letters that were from home. You might do something like that. But it's a long day of just sitting around on your cot or going to the gym to lift or something like that. So you catch up on some sleep, but it's kind of boring, and it's a hard time. It's easier when you're busy because time goes by faster and you can stay more focused on as a team. So the tempo is so much like that, and it's so quick moving, and everything's there's a lot of anxiety around everything you do, that you just kind of plow through it. Then when you get home, you start to really think like, wow, when I remember some of the stuff we were doing or areas we were in, it's like, wow, I can't believe we were actually like doing that, and I can't believe that actually happened for real. It seemed like a movie. And And I didn't think about it much at the time, but you know, it hits you when you get home.
It sounds like a lot of people sort of have that they do that thing where you sort of you put it in a box and you fucking leave it there until you're done, and then when you come home you unpack the box.
Yeah. And I don't think that's limited to veterans. I think any
No.
traumatic experience or any intense experience that anybody goes through is kind of like that. You know, you zone out in the moment, you get done what needs to get done. Right. And then after you start thinking about it and going, oh man, I should have been a lot more scared than I was, because that was weird. We've all been through that. Car accidents, when time slows down and you just kind of push through and get through it, but then you think about it after and you're like, wow, that would have really sucked. I think a lot of people can have that. And I think with veterans, I think there's a different twist to it, because you volunteered for this. It's a volunteer army, right? There wasn't in Vietnam, there was a draft, but nowadays everyone signed up for it. Soldiers know, reservists and National Guard know, if you get orders to deploy and you want to get out of it, you probably can. You could probably fake stuff pretty easily and get out of it. But if you end up over there, you wanted to be. You're there because you wanted to, and you're serving your country, and you come home and everyone high fives you and says, thank you for your service. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. And sometimes you're like, I don't know why you're thanking me. I just went over and did a job, and I enjoyed it, but I just did it. You don't thank other people for their jobs.
That stuff always felt like a little sort of like disingenuous and maybe self-serving to me. Like if I want to thank a veteran, sometimes I'll just roll a joint. Like, here you go. Thanks, man.
And I don't mean to sound like I don't appreciate what people are saying. I think a lot of times people do mean it. And I do.
Yeah, I agree.
I appreciate what they're saying. But it's a weird moment where someone's like, thank you for your service. And you're like, you're welcome. Like,
yeah, right. What do you say to that?
I usually say, thank you for your support.
You know, it's like when someone tells you your dog is cute. Like, yeah, I know he's cute. Like,
not my fault. Yeah.
Can I ask you this, man? I talked to a guy, his name is David Vines, man. They call him Doc. And he was in the Lindenville Guard unit. And he said, one of the things that really, when he came home, that really messed with him was, when you drive around in an environment like that, you're always looking for IEDs. He said every little thing, every tiny object on the side of the road, sometimes they'd have to stop and check it out. And he said when he came home, he found himself still sort of like doing that same hyper vigilance mode. Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, right when you get home, I did. You start to notice how much trash is on the side of America's highways when every little bag and wire kind of looks weird. You have that mode that you're still in, so it becomes habit. I don't feel that anymore. I don't do that anymore. And you guys, remember, fresh back, it was. Yeah. There's a lot of surreal things. Like I would find myself really frustrated in lines at the grocery store or at the gas station to get a coffee.
Chill points.
Yeah, I'd be like fifth or sixth in line, and I'd hear the complaints of the people in front of me, or they took forever to figure out what they wanted. And little annoyances that we all just kind of go, and you brush off. I would get furious inside about, like, who do these people think they are? Don't they realize how good they've got it? They don't understand what it's like somewhere else, and how dare they? And I would get really furious to the point that I'd walk out.
No shit.
Yeah,
that's wild, because I've always known you to be sort of a jovial, mild-mannered human.
I try to be, but I got surprised by how little things like that really drove me nuts and really got me angry. And I ended up in counseling. I did go to counseling for it. I'm a believer in counseling. I think it's a very good thing if you have the right person. That helped a lot. I really found a lot of comfort in cannabis. I did. And not in a heavy way.
So were you not smoking before?
I was, but much more recreationally and much more, when somebody would have some, or when I was hanging out with people or playing poker, whatever. But not in a regular and certainly not in a medical or a therapeutic way. But I did find it calmed me a lot. It focused me. It actually, I've heard, I think you were saying too, like, I don't get like stoner and can't function and stuff like that. I kind of get really focused and I get energetic, and it helped improve my mood.
And I've also found, on a personal note, that it really helped. Like, when I was a kid, I was an angry kid. I just, after this thing with my dad getting arrested for this big hash bust, I was just angry. He kind of left and left us hanging, and I was pissed off for a very long time. And that was the first thing that really helped. I found it just it's like, okay, let's take a deep breath, bring it down. And for me personally, I feel like that's just kept me out of so much trouble that because when I get angry, man, I just say whatever and I do whatever, and it's just not good. And it always gets me in trouble. And the cannabis just brings it right down to the point where I can slow my thoughts down and make better decisions.
Yeah. And I do believe in responsible use. I do. I don't, I really don't like to drive. I don't want to go for a drive if I smoke. I don't want to do a lot of complex stuff if I smoke. I like to relax and enjoy it. So it's usually like end of the night that I would smoke, or that I do. But I was still in the reserves, and there were still the testing was starting to become more random. So I transferred units and took on a senior leadership role of a unit, a sister unit of mine, in the reserves. I wasn't in the Guard, but I was in the reserves in New Hampshire, and I became the platoon sergeant, the lead of 45 soldiers, and a lot of them had not gone overseas before. They were younger and newer soldiers, and that unit hadn't been in like 10 years or something like that. And so we got word that we were probably going to end up going overseas. And I remember we did like a field training once. And that's where we just went down to Fort Devens in Massachusetts and simulations, and you practice some of the tactical moves and stuff like that. And they had never, ever in my career done a urinalysis or a drug test in the field. And I knew the field was coming up. So I'd smoked that week, trying to calm down. I was studying tactics to maneuvers. I was getting a little anxiety from Afghanistan, and I would smoke at night to be able to go to sleep and function the next day, just to really calm me down. I hadn't really expected it. Well, in the field, they did a urinalysis, and they picked 10% of the unit, and I was one of the randomly selected 10%. And I peed in the cup, and I distinctly remember like being really scared and anxious about it, because I knew I was probably going to fail. I was dehydrated. My urine was like dark yellow. I think it would have melted the cup.
Real stinky piss.
Yeah, it's just one of those, And I remember looking down at it like, oh man, that's it. Like, that's going to fail. But who knows? Maybe there's a problem at the lab. Maybe something happens. So I just remember being really anxious and scared about it. So I didn't say anything, just let it happen. And a week or two later, I got a call from a friend at the battalion headquarters. Somebody I'd known and trusted for a long time. He said, "Hey, we got to talk." And I said, "What?" And he goes, you failed your piss test." And I was like, "Oh man, okay, what's that mean?" And he said, "Well, by Army regulation, because of your rank and position, it's automatic separation." And I remember just
is that because you're an officer or an NCO? So if you were just like a grunt, they might let it slide. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know about let it slide, but there was a different policy. There was definitely a policy where people in senior leadership positions, zero tolerance, I think was the terminology for it. And, I said to him, I said, that can't happen. I can't be separated. I've got, at that point, 17 years in.
Right. You got your whole life in this thing.
I got 17 years in, and I didn't know what that meant. And so he said, you should call JAG, which is military lawyers, and talk to them and find out, and I said, okay. And he goes, I really wish you the best of luck. I hope if they can keep anyone, it's someone like you, because I think you're a good person. I said, well, thanks a lot. And we hung up. And I talked to JAG and they said, well, you know, like everything, there's a waiver for everything in the world, right? Every policy that's written, there are waivers written for too. And the military is no exception. And the JAG lawyer said, I've only seen this a couple of times, a handful of times, but you should do, and he laid out a plan. And he said, we can present this to the commanding general, and we don't know what he's going to do. He can just say, no, get out.
So the military provides you a lawyer, like a public defender for the JAG office?
Yeah. Yeah, they do, which is good. They should.
Right.
And this guy was a real straight shooter too. He it's a funny term, but he was very frank and very blunt with me. He was, again, funny terms, but he was, he said, he goes, so what happened? Tell me the truth. It's between us. And I told him, hey, I smoked some pot the week before the field. I was dehydrated.
You went with honesty.
Yeah, I did. I was like, here you go. Because if I'm getting separated, I'm getting separated. So I just told him what was what. And he said, look, I'm not going to lie to you. Doesn't have a good chance. Nothing does at your rank in the policy. And he goes, but we'll try. And here's what you have to do. You have to get people, current leaders, proven leaders, to write letters of support for you. And he said, 3 is good, but they can't be your subordinates. They can't be people that would just say nice things about Mike. They have to be like subjective, and it has to mean something. So it has to be from somebody important. I said, okay. I'm thinking through some people that I know. And he said, and you've got to go through a year at least of weekly counseling, drug counseling. And I said, okay. And he said, and you have to take a piss test every month and never fail one. And he said, if you do that for a year and you get those 3 letters, that's your best chance at getting through this, at getting a waiver. I said, okay. I'm thinking to myself, that's a lot, but okay. It's worth it. I'm 17 years in, the plan is to retire and to get the pension to retire honorably, And so I did it. And I'll tell you what, it's an awkward, very hard conversation to have with senior people that you respect, that respect you. And you're asking them, will you write this letter and put your name on it and vouch for me that I'm worth retaining? That's hard. That was humbling. And I did it.
Sure. And who did you have to go? Who did you get those letters from?
I'd rather not say names because they were really good to me, and I think the whole case file.
But it's like other like officers or something.
They were people senior to me. Yeah, they were commanders.
So those people liked you.
Yeah, they did. And the letter and the things that they wrote were really humbling to me, and really made me realize, wow, I almost lost something really important to me.
And over something like that was it, huh? Cannabis just in your urine, like. Yeah,
that's it. That's all I've ever done. I mean, I drink beers every now and then. I have a beer or two.
They don't care about that, right? If that's in your piss.
Oh no, they don't test for that.
How do you? Oh, they don't even test for alcohol, huh?
Not that I know of. Not in a regular way. No, they didn't when I was in. I did end up going to weekly group drug counseling. And that was an eye-opener for me because I remember the first time I went in, I was thinking about the movie Half Baked when
you in here for some marijuana? Yeah. This is some bullshit.
Yeah, and Bob Saget goes, you ever suck some dick for coke?
Boo this man.
I really felt like that the first meeting I was in. And I really grew to like those people, actually. Those guys, it was a men's group and it was all people in recovery. And, I remember.
Was it other military guys or was it just a random group?
It was a random civilian group. Okay. And we met every week. And at the end of every meeting, the counselor had to sign proof that we had attended for a bunch of us. There were people on legal, they were there for legal reasons was it deferment or What's that program?
Yeah, I can't remember the name all of a sudden. It's the one where you just they
Instead
drop
of
the
going to
charges.
jail, yeah, instead of going to jail, you do this other thing. Yeah. So there were people
Diversion.
like diversion. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There we
So
go.
there were people in that position doing it. But I got my thing signed every week, faithfully, every single week went. Actually continued with the counselor privately after, because now I was like, well, now he knows all about me. The drug counsel, like we didn't sit around for an hour every week talking about our drug habits as much as just talking about ourselves and getting to know each other. And that support of, 8 or 9 other people that go, yeah, I've done the same thing, or I've been in the same position. It's really powerful. So I continued on with him for a little bit, and I took a drug test every single drill and passed every single one for a year, and went before the general after the year that had to make the decision about me. And he decided to retain me in the Army Reserves.
Oh, you had to meet with a general.
Yeah.
That must be a little nerve-wracking, huh?
Yeah. Yep. Full uniform, face to face with the commanding general. And he was the only one that could decide my fate. And so he retained me. I was beyond thankful for that. And my unit deployed overseas and to Iraq, building infrastructure for the Iraqi army to take back Ramadi and Fallujah from ISIS.
And you said that this was like 2015?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yep. And in Iraq, I got my 20-year letter, which for reservists is an official memo from the United States Army that says you've served 20 years and you're eligible for retirement. And you can only get that if you're in good standing and if you have completed all of the years, all the way through. And once you get it, they can't revoke it. It's something that they can't take back. It's permanent. And it says it in that. It says this is a permanent record that cannot be revoked. So it's like you're official, you're good to go. And I retired when I got back.
And now, like, when you, I feel like you might have showed me something about like some weed grows overseas in the desert.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, in Afghanistan, that was one of their revenue sources, was marijuana and poppy. And so you'd be driving a convoy down the road and you'd pass a field like cornfields here. And it was either full of 8-foot cannabis plants or it was full of beautiful, really beautiful pink poppies.
They are pretty, aren't they?
Everything there is so gray and tan that bright green and bright pink really stick out. And yeah, I mean, we were in Kandahar province, which is the birthplace of the Taliban, and did a lot of time on the roads there. And you see a lot of, I mean, huge, and the Canadian Army before us would just light the fields on fire because the thought process was take away their supply of cash, they'll go broke, you'll bankrupt the Taliban.
So the Taliban is controlling most of these grows, you think?
From what we heard, yeah. I mean, I wasn't an intel person. I don't have top secret information
No,
like
no,
that.
but like I've watched a number of documentaries on this, and it looks like, they go around just sort of exploiting small farmers for their labor.
Yeah, the stories that we would hear anecdotally, and who knows what's rumor and what's true, but what we would hear was that the Taliban would either have an arrangement with a farmer or a threat against the farmer.
Right, like be a shame if it burned to the ground.
Yeah. And so I guess that plan that the Canadian Army had backfired. And so we didn't do any of that. And there was a lot of hearts and minds winning that we were trying to do. So, you didn't mess with mosques, you didn't mess with the culture there at all. You respected it. And we didn't burn or anything like that. But we had built a base that we built this little camp once. And the Canadian Army had started it, and then we fell in behind them. And so we were finishing it up. And they had plowed this weed field down, bulldozed it down, and then set up these temporary walls that you fill with sand. It's like a paper bag.
Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah.
Called HESCO barriers.
Yeah.
They expand up. You can take them on a flatbed truck, accordion them out, and then fill them with sand, and you got yourself a big wall. And they were filling them with the sand that they had bulldozed down from the cannabis field. And over time, cannabis plants just started popping up out of the walls because the seeds were still there. And so I do have a few pictures of us sitting there, and there's weed growing out of the walls, like huge stalks and big buds and stuff like that. And that's all you could smell in the whole place. And meanwhile, you know, you're humping around your M16 or your M4, and you've got 210 rounds, and you're it's crazy.
That's fucking hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So
you know, I do remember other soldiers being in that same kind of position, you know, about either failing drug tests or being careful about not failing drug tests. And it wasn't everyone. Not everyone smokes cannabis in the Army.
Sure.
Obviously. And there's a lot of people that don't. But there were people that did, and there still are people that do. I am sure of that.
I would guess that there's more people in the military smoking weed than care to admit it publicly.
It's not, even though these states are rolling back restrictions. You know, Vermont's just opening up shops now, and I'm sure there's more to come. You can feel the attitude lightening up a little bit, but there's still a lot of stigma, and there's still a lot of like, don't say that out loud. Like, don't be careful where you say that out loud. Be careful of how you talk about your use. You really do still have to think that stuff through pretty carefully.
And now you said sort of back a minute ago that when you came home, you were maybe drinking a little more than you wanted to. And maybe, did you feel like the cannabis helped you sort of snap out of that mode?
I would say that I didn't feel like I needed to numb my mind with alcohol as much if I was smoking. You know, when you're having persistent negative thoughts, you want them to go away. And one way is to numb it by getting drunk. And that works. It's not healthy, but it works. Right?
Works for a minute. You'll be back in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah. But for that minute, it does work. Right. And then I think cannabis is another way to therapeutically do that. And I think it's a lot safer. I can't name one time I've ever been hungover from using cannabis. I can't think of one time where I felt like crap after I used cannabis. You know, I don't.
And, you know, rather than sort of numb your thoughts like the alcohol will do, I found that, you know, and this was something I learned in counseling as well, is like the weed helps me sort of just kind of sit with it and look at it rather than just doing something outrageous or letting my mouth get me in trouble again. You know, like it's like, all right, let's slow it down and just take it in. Like, you know, we're not running away from it. We're confronting it head on and sort of with a level head.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. I you know, being careful about who knows if you do or not and stuff like that. You know, I still feel that way. But I believe in what you're doing, Caleb. And I think that some of the interviews I've seen you conducting and some of the issues that you've been talking with people about, it's really good. And I think that's helpful to breaking down that barrier. I really do. And so I wanted to,
Thanks, man.
Part of that, I wanted to help out with that if I could. And I wanted to share this story, not as an inspiration of hope, but more of as an illustration to people of just how difficult it can be sometimes.
Can we talk about the VA?
A little bit, sure. I don't have a lot of interaction with the VA, to be honest with you. But really? Yeah, we can talk about it.
Well, because, you know, and I talked to Doc Vines there, you know, he was mentioning how, someone else told me that the VA has actually been studying cannabis now for over a decade, doing research. And then Doc told me, yeah, they're recommending, there's 2 FDA approved synthetic cannabis products on the market that I can't remember the name of. One of them is called Sativex or something. But now they're offering that to veterans. And I always just thought, you know, like, why not just give them the real thing? Why are we trying so hard to create something synthetically when the natural version, it works so well?
You know, I don't know why. And I haven't had any offers.
I assume
like
it's for money.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I haven't had any offers like that from the VA.
sure.
I did go there when I needed to, apply for compensation or disability compensation, and I did participate as much as I needed to with them. It feels like a hospital, and it's very sterile feeling down there at White River Junction. I'm never a fan of driving by there, even on like the highway. It's funny, my brother came up to visit last year, and I was driving him to the airport in Manchester, New Hampshire, and we drove by the VA, and he goes, "Is that the state prison?" And I go, "No, it's the VA," because it does kind of have that look to it. It's got
like an old asylum.
It's got that feel to it, really does.
It does.
So I'm just not comfortable going there. But I remember when I was going through my legal process after failing the drug test, I do remember thinking like they never should have cared. Like they should care more about my service and like what I have done and my record than what I just did last week. And it got me angry to think like that. And the JAG lawyer or somebody, it wasn't the JAG lawyer, it was somebody that knew about the situation, said, "You have to understand, you still violated federal law. You broke federal law. And the United States Army can't condone soldiers breaking federal law. It has to be laid out that simply."
Even though it's a stupid law and everybody knows that.
Sure, absolutely. I'll agree with you 1,000%, that federally, all of this would be easier for every state if it was federal, right? And, I haven't done a lot of research on alcohol prohibition in the 20s. And I don't know actually if it was all of a sudden it was all legal again in the federal government, or if it was like this where it was state by states. I don't know that answer, but
that's a good question. I thought it was all at once, but now that you mentioned that, I don't remember.
I mean, I think if enough states do this, eventually the federal government's not going to have much of a choice, right? I mean, if more than half the states have legal cannabis laws, at some point the federal government's going to go, what are we doing? But it's going to take somebody really brave and bold to do that.
Well, and the argument I'm hearing from growers here in Vermont is, and certainly something that I've mulled over myself, is, if we see federal legalization here, if it happened tomorrow, you're going to see all these big companies flooding the market with, you're going to be having, pounds of weed from California coming out here for $500, and the small growers in Vermont aren't even going to have a chance to get their foothold before the state is just flooded with this out of state weed. Because I've always been we should legalize all drugs kind of guy. That's always been my perspective. But after talking with these growers and realizing how that might just totally ruin their chance to get involved in this market, I dialed that back a little bit, and I said, wow, maybe we should leave it at decrim, for at least until people have time to develop their markets,
Well, I mean, yes and no. Budweiser is a huge corporation, Anheuser-Busch, and I can go into Hannaford's down the road and see a whole cooler of Budweiser and Busch and this and that. And then in the cooler next to it is Sierra Nevada and Coors Light from across the country and big companies. And then I can see Heady Topper and Coneheads and make the choice to get the Coneheads because I know they're from Vermont and they're of better quality and they're closer and made with cleaner water, and they're going to cost more, but I'm going to get them because I don't want to support Anheuser-Busch. I think Vermonters have already shown the will and the desire to do that. I can get behind the idea that they have to have time to establish themselves. But I mean, some of the good craft beer in Vermont that has really taken that industry ahead just started up in the last 20 years.
And some of the older guys have already sold, like Magic Hat was sold off to Anheuser, so
yeah.
And that is a good argument that I've heard other people make. They're like, hey, not everybody wants to drink Hill Farmstead. Some people want a Bud Light, which is a fair argument. I just, one thing I really would like to see is just the small growers get a chance. The state really emphasized giving people a leg up who had been, maybe arrested on drug charges previously or have been somehow affected negatively by the war on drugs. And, still like some of the entry points into this market are still pretty expensive. Like if you want to build out an indoor grow in your house, that's tens of thousands of dollars there in gear alone. And, I just, people in Vermont are struggling. They don't have a ton of money to begin with. And boy, I hope they'd make it through here.
No, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Would you like, and again, like if we do see federal legalization, I think that would be a great thing for veterans, because then you might see the VA open up their policies and, make this available. Maybe it would be covered by insurance one day and you can just go, pick it up free of charge. Thank you for your service kind of deal. Is that something?
That's really optimistic.
well, I mean, I feel like eventually insurance companies they're already getting involved, but I feel like they're going to want a piece of that national action.
Really?
That's that's a little speculation, but I mean, yeah, especially if you're involved with the VA, like I don't know who runs their insurance, but I'm sure they'd, and it would be a good piece of PR for them as well to just say, hey, look what we're finally doing. Like, instead of all these reports I've heard of the overprescribing of opiates, especially, is really kind of concerning for me, especially here in Vermont. Like we've had enough of that, and I'd really love to see something like that. That wasn't even a question. I was like,
no, it's a good point. It's hard for me to imagine the VA getting to a point like that, but something I hadn't even thought of. So,
oh, no shit. Okay. Well, I gotcha. All right. Did you find, like, let me ask you about some of the people that you served with. Did you find when you come home, like, that other people are having some of these same kind of issues, PTSD, and like sort of angry at the grocery store line, or who are using cannabis to also sort of cope with what they went through?
I'm sure of that. It's not talked about openly. That's not the conversations that we'll have, or that we would have. But you could see it, after deployment, when you start going back to drills. Typically, soldiers that go out on, because it's a Saturday and then you come back on Sunday. Typically, we'd get together on Saturday nights and go out for dinner and then drinks after, or something like that. You see people drinking a lot harder after deployment, partying it up a little bit more. What used to be a couple drinks and dinner turned into like 1 a.m, dragging this one and that one back from the bar. You do see that. Soldiers would call me confidentially and talk about what they were going through, and I did everything I could to help them. Soldiers did fail drug tests after, and it's all confidential. There's no like announcement, but and as a leader, you get told, and sometimes they get separated, and it's really sad. It's really too bad to see. That happened to somebody who joined a volunteer army and served really well. You're not talking about somebody who didn't show up to drill and you got to call them all the time and they're never doing the right thing, and then they piss hot and they get separated and everyone's like, thank God, finally, that guy's gone. That didn't happen a lot. It was more like, wait, what? Like him? Like we need that soldier. They're really good, but they did this thing, and whatever they failed the drug test for, I wrote letters of support for soldiers, and to help them.
Oh, so you've had to be the guy who vouched for other guys that got for drug testing.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And sometimes that works out, but sometimes it doesn't. And it really comes down to who's making those decisions and what their policy is, what their thought process is. Some people really still have that drugs are bad, don't do drugs mentality. And it is what it is. And when you have a position of authority where you're making decisions about people's careers, you know, that stuff comes into play.
Yeah. And I mean, I assume just from what I've seen sort of in my travels here in the last 9 months covering this story, I assume in the military, there's still a lot of that sort of sentiment about drugs. It just seems.
And it comes from a very old school mindset. I think people oversimplify it in their heads where they say, you really want me to trust a pothead breaking the law with a fully automatic machine gun, you know, or some of it's just ignorance. Like they don't understand. They've never done it.
Yeah, right.
So
like we're going to trust a bunch of alcoholics with machine guns to, you know, like.
Yeah, but alcohol is legal. Right. And so and there are a lot of people in the military or in those kinds of positions that make things very cut and dry like that. It's easier for them to do legal versus illegal, you know,
and ignore even like the effects of it and just say, well, it's illegal, so it's bad.
Or not know it, or not know the effects. That I think there are people who believe like reefer madness, like you smoke weed and all of a sudden you want to rape and kill people. I think there's really people out there that believe that's what it does to you. Or people that just lump it all in as all drugs, you know, like cocaine, meth, heroin, fentanyl, cannabis, anything that's an illegal drug has to be bad and done by criminals, you know?
Yeah, I'm still stuck in the place where I just don't see a plant as illegal drugs, you know, like
I know
that, you know, I feel the same way about mushrooms, you know, but you know, like coca plants, you got to take them down and process that shit to make cocaine. It's like weed, you don't have to process it. You cut it down and dry it. It's a plant. It's not I don't count that as the definition of drugs traditionally. I know it's probably in there, but I thought that was always kind of a strange way to group them together.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well, Mike, I'm running out of questions here, but yeah, this has been really fascinating, and I want to thank you for your time. I always leave the last word here for my guests, so it's great to talk to you, buddy. Thanks again, and if you got anything else for us, this is all you on the way out.
Well, if there's any soldiers that are using cannabis and still in the National Guard, the reserves, or whatever, be careful and know what you're doing and know what the consequences of what you're doing are. Just be educated about the world that you might end up in, and be careful. To veterans that have served overseas, you know, thank you for your service, but I appreciate what you did and what you're still doing and what you're still feeling. Thank you, Caleb, for what you're doing. You're doing a service.
Well, thank you, Mike, for your time, man. This has been, maybe we'll make you a regular guest here. We can have you on as a correspondent.
Ooh, yeah. Live from the field.
Yeah. Mike Ferrant, thank you so much. I'll get this up as soon as I can. Take care, my friend.